Hi, and welcome to another edition of Community Cafe. I'm your host, Datta Khalsa. We have with us today, guest is Fire Chief Hajduk of Santa Cruz, and you've been with, how long have you been with the force, and when did you become the chief?
So I became the chief in January of 2019. I've been with the fire department for just over 20 years now.
Okay.
And I've held just about every position you can hold within the fire department as far as coming up through the ranks.
All right. And what's the main focus these days of the Santa Cruz Fire Department?
Well, our focus is pretty broad, and I guess I'd put it back to you. What has been your experience with the fire department? Have you ever had to call 911 or call the fire department to your house?
Not personally.
Yeah.
Being in real estate, my main exposure is clients not being able to get fire insurance.
Yeah.
So that's, and we have sources that can do it, but it's become a challenge.
Yeah.
And particularly in what's called the state fire hazard responsibility areas, which, as I understand it, is pretty much anything in the unincorporated parts of Santa Cruz and some parts of the city as well, right?
Some parts of the city, yeah. So that's been a new dynamic in California as a whole, and as a real estate agent, you've had to deal with that with clients. And what we consider within the city, it's not the state fire hazard area, it's the wildland urban interface. And those are the areas where we've built houses that butt up against the wildland. And within the state of California, as we've seen in the last few years, we've had some fairly historic and catastrophic events occur where people have lost their lives and entire communities have been impacted. Last year with the Paradise Fire, close to 18,000 homes were lost or destroyed, which is on order of magnitude beyond anything that we've seen. The year before, we had the Thomas Fire in Ventura. We also had fires in North Bay where, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 or 8,000 structures were destroyed, which is challenging. And how do you protect against that, and how do you engineer it so that you can decrease the likelihood of it occurring? And here within the city, our wildland urban interface, I think it would be fairly intuitive to most people who live here, but starts over in Moore Creek. And kind of goes up and across the city in a horseshoe, and it's all the open spaces, and we've got all the neighborhoods that are there. And
in those zones, people have to keep 100 feet of clear brush, or how is it?
It depends on what it is. Not all brush is created equal.
Okay.
And so as far as fire hazard, and one of the things that we've done in the last 2 years is recognize that is a bigger hazard for us here in the city. And we've started working within the neighborhoods to educate people, which is the first step, and then give them the tools to harden their homes or make them less likely to catch on fire, more resilient. And we've started doing that through our Firewise group. We have the first Firewise group that was formed here within the city in Prospect Heights. It's actually the first Firewise group that was formed within the county of Santa Cruz, and that's a nationwide program.
Do they have a mascot?
They don't have a mascot, no.
I always think Woodsy Owl, I always think of.
Yeah. And so
Smokey the Bear, I guess, in this case.
Well, that would be the federal government.
Right.
So the Firewise group, think of it as a neighborhood watch for crime. This is a neighborhood watch for wildland fire.
For fire hazards?
For fire hazards, yes.
Okay.
And so
they will turn in a neighbor for having something unsafe?
No, it's not turning in a neighbor. It's actually doing the steps to make your house more protected against wildland fire.
Okay.
So if a fire starts, houses generally don't burn because that wildland fire is coming through. They catch on fire because of the lack of maintenance, the lack of spacing, the lack of the material that you're using. And so if you clean your gutters, if you maintain the shrubbery around your house, if you have that distance between the grass that hasn't been mowed, you don't have anything that's receptive to catch on fire. And then your house catches on fire. And so even within Paradise, when they lost all those homes, there's a number of homes that are still standing. And those were the homes that were absolutely in the path of that fire, but they had done the maintenance and the work up front to harden their houses to catching on fire. And that's roofing, that's screening all the soffits and the entry points into the attic. That's removing the vegetation that's dead and overgrown from around their house so that those embers that land didn't have anything to catch on fire.
Got it.
So that's one step that we've done here within the city, and we have a different profile for wildland risk here within the city than you do in Redding.
Right.
We have different weather patterns. we have fog, and we have a higher moisture content. We have different types of fuel. Redwoods burn much differently than, manzanita and dry chaparral.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any kind of an inspection program that if somebody wants to have their house checked out, is there an expert they can call, or would they call the fire department?
So you can call the fire department. We're more than happy to come out and give people some tools. This is something that we have started within our department. And this is the FireWise group, and this is a program that you can go online and look up. FireWise, it's a National Fire Protection Agency program that's nationwide.
And that's at firewise.org?
Yep.
Okay.
And if you open this up, this has all the different things that I'm talking about as far as those different zones around your house and what you can do to harden your house and make it less likely to catch on fire.
Nice.
And really,
was this produced with local funds? Or?
No, this is a nationwide program.
Okay.
This here is
NFPA, I see.
NFPA, yeah.
Okay. And
so this is gives people the steps that they can do. And a lot of these are not, everyone here is 100 feet of clearance and they think that they're going to have barren landscape around their house for 100 feet, and that's not what it is. Mm-hmm. What you're really trying to do is minimize the fuel that's available to catch your house on fire, and you're trying to minimize the fuel that's available to go from the ground to the brush to the tree. We call that laddering. Mm-hmm. And so you're really trying to create vertical gaps between those fuel sources so that if you have a fire, it's not as intense and it doesn't spread. And you're also trying to create those horizontal gaps between what most people want to preserve, which is their house, and those things that can catch on fire.
Boy, some of these are no-brainers after seeing them, but store firewood at least 30 feet away from the home. I got to think most people don't do that.
No, because when it's wet and rainy or cold out, you would just want to open up the door, grab a piece of firewood, and bring it inside.
Naturally.
But those are fuel sources.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to minimize those fuel sources next to your house. And the best analogy I can give is most people have gone camping or they build a fire in their fireplace.
You can never build a fire when you want to.
Right.
But
so when you're building a fire, you don't put the biggest log in your fireplace and try and light it. That's hard to do. Think of your house as the log. What you do is you put in small kindling, small pieces of paper that are really easy to catch on fire, and you get those going, and then you put the big log on the fire, and then it catches on fire. So if you think of your house as that big log, what you're trying to do is remove all that kindling from around your house. The dry brush, the wood pile that's been sitting for 5 years, the wooden deck that's got plastic chairs on it, the trees that have dropped pine needles all summer and all fall onto your roof and collected in the valleys, and now that they're in the gutters and they're dry, and that's the kindling. And so if you can remove that kindling, you're going to make it much more likely that your house is not going to catch on fire. And then the actual construction of the house itself, as far as what type of roofing material you have and what kind of siding you have, and also the attic vents and the soffit vents, having that screen material that will block any ember from a wildland fire from going into your house. Keep it outside.
I see. So, and it's been a lot in the news, and obviously, billions of dollars of legal battles with PG&E being largely blamed for many of these fires. Do you have any personal opinion, or have there been any directives? I understand, or what's your knowledge of, for example, the power shutdowns? Who calls the shots on that? Is it PG&E, or are they under a mandate from some other agency?
Well, they're not under a mandate from the city of Santa Cruz. They're a large organization. The PG&E, the Public Safety Power Shutdown, or the PSPS events, I've been intimately familiar with here within the city. The fire department also is responsible for the emergency management of the city, and we're responsible for the EOC, or the Emergency Operations Center. And that's where we coordinate our disaster response to anything. And the PSPS events impacted us. We had 2 separate events here within the city. And besides impacting the citizens and people within the city, they also impacted some of the infrastructure for the city that we had to manage. And probably the largest impact for the city was our water department. So we have a water treatment facility that's on Graham Hill. And our 2 primary sources of water for that are from Loch Lomond, which is far away, and that we have to pump water from the base, Zionine and Felton, up and over Pipeline Road to our water treatment plant. And we also draw water from the North Coast. And when we don't have power, those pumps don't work.
So you have to bring in generator trucks?
We have to bring in generators, and then when the generators are running, they have fuel sources that we have to make sure that we maintain that fuel so that they're always running.
Wow.
And we don't just provide water for the city of Santa Cruz. We have an intertie with the Soquel Creek Water District. So the city of Santa Cruz provides water for a little over 100,000 people here within the county.
Wow. Yeah, some reaching into Live Oak and other parts.
Yeah.
So I think one of the more interesting aspects of I guess particularly the forest firefighting is when they bring the prisoners out to fight. Can you talk a little bit more? How does that dynamic work? How do you say, okay, call up the
Call up the troops?
Call up the troops.
Yeah. So that is a whole subject in and of itself. And here within California, we have a couple different things in place that address that. One of them is the CFAA, which is the California Fire Assistance Agreement, where all the different parties that may have some resources or have a need for those resources sign on to that. And that is CAL FIRE, which is our state firefighting agency, the federal agency. There's a number of different agencies that are part of that. And within California, it's broken up into regions or zones that get funneled into larger geographic coordination centers. So when we have a large fire like the Kincaid fire that just occurred, at the height of that, we had over 5,000 firefighters or 5,000 people that were assigned to that fire. And that agreement and those resources are all coordinated at the state and federal level for who's going to pay for what resources are needed, tracking those resources, making sure that they're being used efficiently.
And so where do the prisoners figure into that?
So the prisoners, so what you're thinking of is, and I'll just stick with the state level, is CAL FIRE, which is our state firefighting force. They have a number of camps, and we actually have one here in Santa Cruz, Ben Lomond Camp, and they take prisoners that are lower threat or lower risk, and this is an opportunity for them to get job skills, but also have the ability to have a change in their environment, maybe learn some skills other than being in a prison setting. And so
they get trained before they get put on the front lines.
Absolutely. Everyone who's out on the line has a level of training. And so they're called hand crews. And there's a number of camps spread all up and down the state of California. And those hand crews, they do phenomenal work. Each one of those crews, there's kind of a floating number that's associated with them. They come with a captain or a supervisor. They also have the California Department of Corrections because they are prisoners. And they're assigned to a wildland fire and given a task. And they do a lot of the hard work that is required for wildland firefighting. Chainsaws, digging fire line, hand tools. And so they're supervised and we interact with them on a limited degree. We usually interact with the captain who gives direction. We don't interact directly with the people because they are prisoners.
And then also this is on where the forest fire track, with the planes hauling water out of the ocean. I always wonder about the fish. They must have filters. I mean, these are just silly technical questions, that you probably, but.
So the planes generally we don't have super scoopers here. Those are fixed wing. Those would be at a air base that's fire retardant that's made and delivered. And what you're thinking of are the helicopters where they come in and they suck up usually 300 gallons or so out of a pond, out of a lake, out of a tank that we set up. I don't think they're damaging the fish all that much. And then they do a spot drop on a fire as needed.
Circling back to the city, what are some of the other issues? I mean, there's been, recently there was, I think about 5 years ago, now time flies, but they've done the mandatory inspection ordinance, and a lot of that's under the auspices of health and safety. So do you ever get called in on some of those where they've found, illegally constructed buildings and had to make a call as a fire chief?
Yeah, and so generally speaking, the mandatory inspections through the building department, and they have their inspectors. We do work in conjunction with them. We have another set of mandated inspections that we have to do on an annual basis, hotels and businesses, and those are really geared toward the maintenance of a building to make sure that the standard that building was built to is being maintained at that standard. So exiting. That we don't have high piled stock in front of the only exit out of here, that the doors that say exit aren't being chained shut. And we found those. That the fire sprinkler systems are being maintained and tested as needed. And generally speaking, for any business or any occupancy that we go into, our first step is education. If you can explain the why, most people are much more receptive to fixing it versus us coming in and just saying, you shall.
Yeah.
And we do get called in on a couple of occasions where the life safety hazard is so significant that we have to close them. But those are the exception, not the rule. Generally speaking, we work with people, we give them a time frame, give them the why and the what, and work with them to get to that point.
So as relatively new fire chief, what's the term of a fire chief? Is it?
At the pleasure of the city manager.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as this coming up on your first anniversary as fire chief, what were your goals? Did you have any ultimatums when you came in? This is going to happen, and has that happened, or are there any remaining? Is there any agenda?
There is an agenda. I think one of the challenges that we have is the fire service as a whole has evolved from what it was, and this is why I asked you: have you ever called 911, or had the fire department come to your house or interacted with them? And most people, if they do say yes, it's been for a one-time event, whereas that is our normal day-to-day, every-time event.
Right.
And so, your expectations or your understanding of the fire service, if you don't have that real-life interaction, it is formed based on movies, on what you see on the news. Backdraft, right? And that's not reality.
Yeah.
And so the fire service for us here in the city, we're not just a fire department, even though we say fire department. We are absolutely here to put out fires, whether that's in a house, in a car, in the wildland. But we've evolved over the last few decades into a full service, all hazard response.
Are we still rescuing cats from trees? Or?
No.
No, okay.
No, they come down.
So what are the other things?
So for us, and I guess I'll just go back to our, the fire department, we're broken up into a couple of different divisions. The first one would be administration, which I would fall under, and that's the budgeting, the goals, the compliance, the overall running of the department. The next one would be suppression, and that is what most people would think of when they think of the fire department. That would be the backdraft, right? But within that, we also, for our response, we get called for everything. Not just fires.
Paramedic.
We are all advanced life support paramedic on every one of our engines. We have 4 engines and a truck that is staffed 24 hours a day, every day of the year, to respond as needed. And that is really, those rolling toolboxes are what the fire department is. So we are there for rescue, for vehicle extrication, for water rescue. We are there for advanced life support, paramedic level service. We are there for wildland suppression. We are there for a whole host of services that most people never realize that we are the responsible agent for that. The next one, kind of getting into what you were talking about codes, would be our prevention bureau, and that's the fire marshal, the deputy fire marshal, and that's where those standards, have you ever had to go out for that life safety inspection? Those are the ones who interact with that, and also investigating the cause of a fire and determining whether or not there was a criminal intent or a criminal element.
So you do have detectives?
Yes.
Okay. How many detectives in the city?
Well, they're not detectives. They're within the Fire Prevention Bureau. So we have a fire marshal, a deputy fire marshal, and a fire inspector. And then we also have the Marine Safety Division, which is the lifeguard service. And within that, we have what you would think of as the typical lifeguard service down in front of the boardwalk. But we also provide service to the city of Capitola under contract for lifeguard services, and we also have a year-round marine rescue service.
Wow.
And some of our firefighters are cross-trained on the engines to be rescue swimmers that get in the water in the wintertime when the lifeguards aren't in the towers. And they are the ones who are getting in the water when a vehicle goes off the wharf or when someone falls in the ocean and can't get out.
And if the Coast Guard's not close enough, the fire department's got it.
Yes, absolutely.
So do you guys ever race the Coast Guard so you can get there first?
No.
Okay.
No. We respond as needed within the city, and also mutual aid up on the North Coast, all the way up to the county line.
So if shark attack happened, just saying.
Yeah, no, shark, that's one of those conversations we have about shark attacks. Just the population of great whites has grown here in the Monterey Bay in the last 5 years.
Yeah, there's like a whole club of them off the Med ship.
There's a whole rookery down there.
Rookery.
Yeah, and they think the latest thinking about that is that they may be like salmon where they were birthed, that they have a memory and they come back to that same location. So most of the sharks that we're seeing down in that area are under 8 feet. They're considered juveniles. And at that age, they're eating fish and rays and not mammals.
And drinking mostly.
Yes. Yeah, at that age. Good decisions.
Okay.
So we did have one shark attack off Steamer Lane, but it was on a kayak. It was about 2 years ago. There's a gentleman who was kayaking just outside where the surfers were, and the shark came up and bit the nose of his kayak, lifted him up out of the water and him out of the boat.
Wow.
Luckily, he didn't come back, and he got cut on his boat when he was trying to get back into it. Nothing happened from the shark.
Wow. And usually it's because they think it's a seal?
I don't know.
Who knows? You have to ask the shark.
Yeah.
So do you have a way of grading yourself, or do you get graded by the state or some other agency? Does the performance of the Santa Cruz City Fire Department get some sort of a gold star? Or
So there's a couple different standards, the NFPA being one of them, and then there's also the insurance rating for the city. The city of Santa Cruz is an ISO rating of 2, and the highest being 1. And so that.
What's the lowest?
I think it goes all the way down below 10. Yeah.
2's pretty damn good.
Yeah, we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
So we do have a rating for that, and then obviously, we serve for the public. So, are we meeting the public's needs and the public's intent for what services we provide? And part of that is education for responding to their problems today in a timely manner, but also looking forward and looking at what is going to be, not just providing the services that we've always provided. So if you go back to the 70s, the fire department was strictly a fire department, and then they've morphed into the realm of medical care, and then also other technical rescue services. And so, I think that grading would be not only just the political will, but also what the public, are we meeting their needs? Are we responding to their needs in a way that is meeting, their disaster or their emergency?
Well, I wonder if the insurance companies kind of track that.
They do a little bit, but the insurance companies have their own system. It has little to do with us. So, like you, in your realm as a real estate agent, are looking at insurance and being able to, have a house that someone wants to live in, and can they get insurance for what is probably their most valuable asset, right?
Yep.
And that is a conversation that's happening at the state level for how insurance companies are going to insure those, and what standard will be met, be put in place that will allow them to get that insurance so someone can live in that place. A lot of what we've talked about in here is going to have an impact on that, but ultimately the insurance agencies are going to use their own formula for whether or not that is a good risk for them, or is there something that you can put in place that's going to mitigate that risk so that they will provide insurance.
Okay. And what's the status of the workforce at the Santa Cruz City Fire Department right now? Are you guys looking to hire? Are you well staffed?
So our staffing is one. So we talked about some of those mandates that I have. One of my goals is to increase the staffing that we have within the fire department for a number of reasons. Our staffing has remained static for the last 25 years. We don't have more people available to respond to calls today than we had 25 years ago. Even though our call volume and our call complexity has increased over time. So on any given day, we have 15 people on 5 different pieces of apparatus to respond to a call. That is no different than what we had 20, 25 years ago. So one of my goals is to increase the staffing, not just to respond on a fire engine, but also to respond to that one area of calls that has increased over time, and those are calls for service for medical aids. And having the ability to respond to those calls effectively, and not just with an engine or a truck. We will always be here for firefighting, but our calls for service, people call the fire department for everything. And so having that force that's available to respond day in and day out is important to me.
And what's the policy with regard to billing? Let's say you show up, provide a service, and I've heard that on occasion that the citizen is asked to contribute towards what was reported or what was created by perhaps their actions.
From the fire department?
Yeah.
So very rarely do we have a bill. Usually there has to be a criminal intent. So
if it were arson, for example?
Again, we'd have to prove criminal intent.
Yeah.
So we are a standing army that is available. We are paid for through public funds. We do not bill for our service, whether that's a small one or a big one, unless there is a criminal element there.
What if somebody just cried wolf?
We have ways of dealing with that, but it's not necessarily giving them a bill. So we have people who've called 911 repeatedly. Yeah. And again, we go back to that education and then getting down to, why is this person doing this? What services do they need? And so we have had a few people that have cried wolf, like you said, and calling 911.
Or yelled fire.
Don't yell fire in a theater, right?
Right.
So we've had people who've called 911 repeatedly, either because they had an issue or that's what they were doing. If it's malicious in the sense of calling 911, that can go into the criminal element. We involve Santa Cruz PD.
Yeah.
But we've also had people that have had needs that we can't meet, and they haven't been able to connect with the services that they actually need. And we see that a lot of times in people where they're transitioning from stable health
right.
to unstable health, where they're living alone, and now they need assisted living. And during that transition period, we're not going to give you a bill because you're calling us for help. And we do have those, we call them pick up and put backs,
right.
public assist, where we have someone who was able to walk, and through injury, disease, illness, maybe they can't walk now. And so they need help getting from, they've fallen and they can't get off the floor and they need to get back to bed. And so we do that.
What agencies would you call in that case?
So those, generally, we will reach out to friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
We have adult protective services.
Mm-hmm.
We will reach out to the county, who can assign a caseworker. And again, this is not a punitive, we're not giving you a bill
Not
for
at
our
all.
services. We're trying to connect that person.
We're making a judgment call
Yeah.
for the good of the individual, obviously.
Yeah.
And then have you seen, or has the increase in homelessness and the trend towards an increasingly I think the population of homelessness is in the range of 5,000 people, or?
I think the last point in time count that, and I participated in that one this year, was around 2,000 for that. And of those,
which is in the city.
within the city. I think the city count was actually lower than that.
Okay. And has that changed how your services, how your time is spent?
Yes and no. I mean, I think homelessness has always been an issue here within the city of Santa Cruz. I mean, part of it is we have a Mediterranean climate, and we also are a seaside tourist town. And so if you look at the papers going back every decade, there's always been that element, whether it's worse now than it was or better now than it was. It's always been there. And within that population, just like any other population, there's challenges.
Right.
So, just because you're housed or unhoused doesn't mean that you don't have diabetes, that you don't have an accident, that you don't have something happen, and we get called for that. I think the challenge with right now with, with at least within the public sphere of discussing it, is people want to use that term homelessness as a catch-all for a population that is not homogenous.
Yeah.
They're not all the same.
Clearly, some have jobs, some don't.
Yeah.
Some are older. Some may have mental health issues.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like in those cases, I mean, there's a lot of effort being done to sort and identify the need and direct them in the direction that they need to get that taken care of. So you're finding more of that as well?
I don't know that we're finding more of it. They are that segment of our population is someone that we interact with, but we are not law enforcement. We are not mental health. We are not social services. We are emergency response. So that if you're homeless or not, if you fall and break your leg and are at the bottom of a cliff,
you need help.
You need help, and that's what we're there for. Whether or not we don't ask for your address, we're not billing you for our services. That population for us, the one dynamic that has become a little bit more challenging for us, and it gets back to wildland, is we have a number of people who are homeless who are in some of our open spaces. And those open spaces, at certain times of the year, it's not just the impact just for that individual, it's the potential impact on the entire community or those open spaces. And so 2 years ago, we closed our open spaces during a period of time before rains came. And that was not directed so much at homeless, it was directed at the potential for wildland fire. This year, we made a very, I don't want to call it aggressive, but we made a concerted effort to educate people about the impacts of wildland fires and them being the sources of ignition for a wildland fire, specifically within Pogonip and some of our areas along the Highway 9 corridor. And we didn't shut down our open spaces this year because we didn't have the same fires. We also didn't have the same, last year we had a number of fires that were started and they were all human caused, whether they were intentional or unintentional. This year, we were able to limit that by going.
I think last year, the one down near the swimming hole on Highway 89,
that was one of them.
That was one.
Yeah, we had one behind Paradise Park, the community.
Yeah.
And we also had a number of fires within Pogonip itself. And this year we were able to not have those fires start.
How often does arson happen in this town?
That comes and goes. You know, arson,
Do you see a cycle? Is it economic related?
It can be. I think for last year we had a number of individuals that we were able to prosecute, and they're incarcerated right now. Mm-hmm. Arson is a really challenging legal term to prove. You know, the act of arson usually is a solo effort, and also the act of arson creates fire, which in and of itself destroys most of what you consider to be evidence in a court of law. So proving arson is really, really challenging. We were able to get a couple of convictions this last year, and I think that's one of the other reasons why we didn't have the same dynamic in our open spaces this year.
And then I guess in closing, any final messages you want to leave the viewers with?
So the fire department, regardless of whether or not you have called for us, we are here as a public resource. Our first job is to try and educate and prevent a fire from happening, and we do that through some of our community programs. We do that through some of our building codes. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the way houses are built today versus 40 years ago, the number of life safety systems that are in those houses have been incredibly effective. Any
big ones coming up? Any big changes that you know of, or is it?
Not within the fire code. Within the building code, there's some incremental changes. But if you look at smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, those were not commonplace. Now they're mandated. Right. And those have been incredibly effective.
Every bedroom and the hallway outside the bedroom, and one carbon monoxide detector on each floor.
Yeah. And so those are life safety systems that have been put in place to protect the public. And that really, really successful program as far as alerting people and getting them out of a structure before they have the impact of fire. Sprinkler systems, limiting the spread of fire, and more importantly, giving people more time to get out of a structure that's on fire. Yeah. Sprinkler systems are designed to hold a fire in check, not necessarily to extinguish it. And they're designed to do that so people can get out of that structure before fire overtakes them.
And maybe wake them up too.
Well, sprinkler systems, well, the bell might.
That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
Smoke alarm. But, you know, we're here to respond to the need for medical calls. We're here to respond to the need for fires. We also manage emergencies much better than a lot of other agencies because that's what we do on a yearly basis, coordinating wildland response. Like I said, the Kincaid fire, we had over 5,000 people there. So our ability for the logistics and the management and the coordination and the goals, we do that really well. We do that here in the city for the EOC, and that is something that I don't see decreasing, especially with the dynamic of PG&E and the dynamic of wildland fires. Another thing that we've done here within the city, and this is something that is local, and I can give you this one. This is a disaster response plan that is on our website. Yeah. And if you look at the front page right here that you're looking at, it's got a map of the city with the major routes, travel routes. You always want to know 2 routes in and out of where you live in case one is blocked. And then if you open it up on the inside, it's got different checklists for how to prepare for a number of different types of emergencies, not just fire, but flood, earthquake, tsunami. Nice. And the best plan you have is the one you never have to use.
And that's at cityofsantacruz.com/emergency storm preparation.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Well, I really appreciate all the services that you and the rest of the firefighters of the city bring. And thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you out there saving lives.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us, and hope to see you on the next show.